The great hall had never felt quite so vast as it did now, with most of the students having retreated to their common rooms after the evening feast. Emma Rosewood sat alone at the far end of the Gryffindor table, her transfiguration essay spread before her like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. The parchment bore several ink blots where her quill had hesitated, and Professor McGonagall's precise instructions seemed to dance mockingly before her tired eyes. Above her, the enchanted ceiling reflected the November sky in all its moody splendor. Heavy clouds drifted across a backdrop of deep purple, occasionally parting to reveal clusters of stars that twinkled like scattered diamonds. Emma found herself watching the celestial display more than focusing on her homework, mesmerized by the way the magical ceiling captured every subtle shift in the weather outside. Miss Rosewood. The crisp voice of Professor McGonagall broke through her reverie. Emma jumped, nearly knocking over her inkwell, and looked up to find the deputy headmistress approaching with her characteristic measured stride. Her emerald robes rustled softly against the stone floor, and her sharp eyes held their usual mixture of concern and expectation. "I'm sorry, Professor," Emma stammered, quickly straightening her papers. "I was just working on your transfiguration essay, I presume." McGonagall's expression softened slightly as she glanced at the scattered parchment. "The theory of molecular restructuring in inanimate objects, if I'm not mistaken." Emma nodded, her cheeks warming with embarrassment. "I've been trying to understand how intention affects the transformation process, but it's rather more complex than I initially thought." McGonagall moved closer, her keen eyes scanning Emma's notes. "Intention is indeed crucial, Miss Rosewood, but so is understanding. You cannot successfully transfigure something if you don't truly comprehend both what it is and what you wish it to become." She paused, her voice taking on a gentler tone. "Perhaps you might benefit from completing this in your common room. The evening grows late, and the Great Hall can feel rather overwhelming when one is alone with one's thoughts." As if summoned by her words, a soft humming drifted through the vast space. Emma's head turned toward the sound, her brow furrowing with curiosity. The melody was gentle and haunting, carrying a weight of age and wisdom that seemed to resonate in the very stones of the castle. McGonagall followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. "Ah, I see you've noticed our evening serenade. The Sorting Hat often finds these quiet hours conducive to reflection." "The Sorting Hat?" Emma's quill paused mid-dip in the inkwell. "But I thought it only spoke during the sorting ceremony." "Oh, my dear girl," McGonagall chuckled softly. "The hat has been conscious for over 1,000 years. Do you truly believe it only has something to say once annually?" She gathered her robes with practiced efficiency. "I suggest you finish quickly and retire to Gryffindor Tower. Mr. Filch will be making his evening rounds shortly, and he's particularly irritable when he finds students wandering about after hours." With that, the professor strode away, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. Emma watched her go, then turned her attention back to the mysterious humming. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the staff table, where the ancient Sorting Hat sat upon its customary stool, apparently the source of the melodic sound. Curiosity overcoming caution, Emma carefully gathered her things and moved closer. The humming grew more distinct as she approached, revealing itself to be a complex melody that seemed to weave together multiple harmonies. It was neither sad nor joyful, but something deeper, nostalgic perhaps, or contemplative. She settled into a seat at the Ravenclaw table, close enough to hear clearly, but far enough to avoid drawing attention to herself. Her essay lay forgotten as she listened, captivated by the unexpected beauty of the hat's song. The melody seemed to shift and change, as if the hat was sorting through different memories, each one carrying its own emotional weight. "Listening to my evening concert, are you?" Emma nearly fell from her seat as the hat's voice suddenly filled the great hall. But instead of the commanding tone she remembered from the sorting ceremony, this voice was warm and conversational, tinged with gentle amusement. I'm sorry," Emma stammered, standing hastily. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just finishing my homework when I heard—" "Oh, sit down, child," the hat chuckled, its voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I don't mind the company. It gets rather lonely up here once the feast ends and the last of the staff retreat to their chambers." Emma hesitated, then slowly resumed her seat. "You were humming. It was beautiful." "Ah, you have a good ear," the hat replied, with evident pleasure. "I was thinking about the autumn of 1847, a particularly challenging year for sorting, as I recall. So many students who didn't quite fit the traditional molds." The hat paused thoughtfully. "There was one girl, Millicent Clearwater, a muggle born like yourself. Brilliant mind, brave heart. But oh, how she worried about belonging." Emma's attention sharpened. "What happened to her?" "What happens to all of them in the end," the hat said with deep satisfaction. "She found her place, became head girl, actually, and later went on to work in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. Had quite the career stabilizing unstable magic in muggle areas." The hat's voice took on a warmer tone. "But that first month at Hogwarts, she sat right where you're sitting now, every evening, working on her assignments and trying to convince herself she belonged in the magical world." Emma felt a flutter of recognition in her chest. "How do you know all this?" "My dear child, I am the memory of Hogwarts," the hat replied gently. "Every student who has ever worn me, every sorting I've performed, every moment of doubt and triumph, they all become part of me. I carry the stories of 1,000 years within my brim." As if responding to the hat's words, the portraits along the walls began to stir. Emma noticed nearly headless Nick gliding into the hall, his translucent form shimmering in the candlelight. The ghost nodded politely to her before settling into a comfortable position near the staff table. "Good evening, Sir Nicholas," the hat greeted warmly. "Come to join our little gathering." "Indeed," Nick replied, his voice carrying that peculiar hollow quality of ghostly speech. "I do so enjoy your evening recollections. They remind me of my own days here as a student, though that was considerably longer ago than I care to admit." He turned to Emma with a courteous bow. "Miss Rosewood, isn't it? How are you finding Hogwarts thus far?" It's Emma paused, searching for the right words. "It's wonderful, but also rather overwhelming. Everything is so different from what I am used to." "Perfectly natural," Nick assured her. "I remember my first weeks here. I spent most of my time convinced I'd accidentally wandered into someone else's life. The magical world has a way of making one feel very small at first." "But not for long," the hat interjected sagely. "The magic of Hogwarts isn't just in the spells and potions, you know. It's in the way the castle embraces each student, helps them discover who they're meant to become. Emma glanced around the great hall, taking in the floating candles that continued to provide warm light despite the late hour, the house banners that hung proudly from the ceiling, and the sense of ancient wisdom that seemed to permeate every stone. Sometimes I feel like the castle is watching me. Oh, it absolutely is, the hat laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Hogwarts is more alive than most people realize. The castle has a consciousness of sorts, not like you or I, but aware nonetheless. It knows its students, protects them, nurtures them. Nearly headless. Nick nodded in agreement. I've seen it countless times over the centuries. Students arrive feeling lost and uncertain, and gradually the castle works its magic. Not the flashy kind with wands and incantations, but the deeper magic of belonging. Emma felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the magical fireplaces. Is that why you sing in the evenings? To help the castle nurture us? Partially, the hat admitted, but also because I enjoy it. After 1,000 years of sorting anxious 11-year-olds, I find the quiet hours quite restorative. I can reflect on the day's new additions to our community, consider how they might grow and change, and sometimes the hat's voice grew softer. I like to remember the students who came before. The portrait of a stern-looking wizard with a silver beard leaned forward from his frame near the Slytherin table. Are you telling stories again, old hat? I do hope you're not boring our young friend with tales of your glory days. Phineas Nigellus Black, the hat replied with fond exasperation. I'll have you know, my stories are far from boring. They're educational. Everything's educational when you've lived as long as we have. Another portrait chimed in, this one depicting a kindly witch with paint-stained robes. The question is whether they're interesting. Emma found herself smiling as she listened to the friendly banter between the hat and the portraits. There was something deeply comforting about their easy camaraderie, the way they included her in their conversation without making her feel like an intruder. What I find interesting, nearly headless, Nick said thoughtfully, is how each generation of students brings something new to Hogwarts, yet the essential spirit of the place remains unchanged. The same hopes, fears, and dreams played out again and again in infinite variation. The hat hummed in agreement, the sound weaving through the great space like a gentle spell. Indeed, young miss, Rosewood here reminds me so strongly of Millicent Clearwater, but also of Thomas Greengrass from the 1920s and Helena Proudfoot from the 1760s. The details change, but the fundamental journey remains the same. What journey is that, Emma asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. The journey from wondering if you belong to knowing that you do. The hat replied simply, it's the same for every student, regardless of their background. Wizard-raised children worry they won't live up to their family legacy, while Muggle-born students fear they'll never truly understand this world. But in the end, Hogwarts teaches them all the same lesson, which is that belonging isn't about where you come from, nearly headless. Nick said gently, it's about what you choose to do once you're here, how you treat your fellow students, how you engage with your studies, how you contribute to the community we've all helped build. Emma felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, though she couldn't quite say why. There was something profoundly moving about sitting in this ancient hall, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of centuries being welcomed into a conversation that felt both intimate and eternal. The hat seemed to sense her emotion. Would you like to hear about some of the other students who sat where you're sitting? I have stories of brave Gryffindors and clever Ravenclaws, loyal Hufflepuffs and ambitious Slytherins, all of whom started their Hogwarts journey feeling exactly as you do now. Emma nodded eagerly, settling more comfortably in her seat. Her Transfiguration essay lay completely forgotten now, but somehow she sensed that what she was learning tonight was far more valuable than any homework assignment. "Very well," the hat said with evident pleasure. "Let me tell you about Marcus Bellwether, a Gryffindor from the 1890s. He arrived at Hogwarts absolutely convinced he'd been missorted because he was terrified of heights. Rather problematic when your house mascot is a lion and everyone expects you to be bold and fearless." As the hat began its tale, Emma noticed more portraits leaning in to listen, their painted faces showing genuine interest despite having surely heard these stories countless times before. The great hall, which had seemed so empty and overwhelming just an hour ago, now felt warm and intimate, filled with the invisible presence of all the students who had come before her. The enchanted ceiling above continued its slow dance of clouds and stars, and Emma realized with a start that she no longer felt like an outsider looking in. She was part of this now, part of the continuing story of Hogwarts, part of the great tapestry of students and teachers and magical beings who called this castle home. For the first time since arriving at Hogwarts, Emma Rosewood felt truly welcome. Not because anyone had explicitly told her she belonged, but because she'd been invited to share in something precious and eternal, the quiet magic of evening conversation, the gentle wisdom of those who had walked these halls before her, and the warm knowledge that she was now part of something infinitely larger and more wonderful than she had ever imagined. The Sorting Hat's evening song continued, weaving through the great hall like a lullaby for the castle itself, and Emma sat contentedly in its embrace, finally understanding that home wasn't just a place you came from. It was a place that welcomed you in and helped you become who you were meant to be. Emma stared at the crimson canopy above her bed, watching the shadows dance across the fabric as the fire in the Gryffindor common room crackled far below. Sleep eluded her completely, chased away by a peculiar mixture of homesickness and restless energy that seemed to have settled in her bones like winter cold. The soft breathing of her dormmates, Parvati's gentle sighs, Lavender's occasional murmurs, and Hermione's precise, even breaths only emphasized her own wakefulness. The digital clock her mother had insisted she bring, despite its dubious functionality in Hogwarts' magic-saturated environment, showed 11:30, though Emma suspected it might be running slow. She'd been lying there for what felt like hours, her mind churning through the day's events, a disastrous potions lesson where her shrinking solution had turned into something resembling purple pudding, a charms class where her feather had stubbornly refused to levitate, and worst of all, a moment during dinner when she'd reached for what she thought was pumpkin juice, only to find herself holding a goblet of something that smelled distinctly of cabbage. At home, when sleep wouldn't come, she could pad downstairs to the kitchen, where her mother would inevitably be grading papers by lamplight. ready with warm milk and gentle conversation. Here, surrounded by magic and mystery, she felt more alone than ever. Unable to bear the confinement of her bed any longer, Emma slipped quietly from beneath her covers. The dormitory floor felt cold against her bare feet, and she quickly pulled on her slippers and dressing gown. Moving with the careful stealth that came naturally after weeks of navigating Hogwarts' creaky corridors, she crept past her sleeping roommates and down the spiral staircase to the common room. The dying embers in the great fireplace cast a warm golden glow across the familiar space. House elves had clearly been at work while the students slept. The common room was immaculate, cushions plumped, books neatly arranged, and the lingering sense of the evening's cocoa and biscuits replaced by the fresh, clean smell of magical cleaning charms. Emma settled into her favorite armchair near the fire, drawing her knees up to her chest and gazing into the glowing coals. "Can't sleep either," dear Emma's head whipped around toward the voice, her heart hammering. The fat lady's portrait hung in its usual place by the entrance hole, but instead of her typical jovial expression, she wore a look of gentle concern. More surprising still was the fact that she was speaking in hushed, conspiratorial tones, rather than her usual booming voice. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered, not wanting to wake anyone. "I didn't mean to disturb." "Oh, nonsense," the fat lady interrupted, though she kept her voice low. "You're not disturbing anything, child. I was just having a chat with Violet." She gestured to an empty frame nearby, which Emma had never seen occupied. "She's popped off to visit the portrait of Sir Cadogan's great-aunt in the third-floor corridor. Frightfully gossipy, that one, but excellent company for a midnight conversation." Emma blinked in confusion. "Violet can leave her portrait?" The fat lady chuckled softly, her pink silk dress rustling as she leaned forward. "Oh, my dear, did you think we were trapped in our frames like pressed flowers? We can visit any portrait in the castle, provided there's a connecting network of frames. It's rather like your flu network, I suppose, but for painted people." As if summoned by her words, a thin woman in medieval dress materialized in Violet's frame, slightly out of breath and looking thoroughly scandalized. "You'll never guess what I've just heard," Violet announced in a stage whisper that carried clearly across the common room. "Lady Margaret, in the fourth-floor tapestry, says that Peeves has been planning something dreadful for tomorrow's defense against the dark arts class. Something involving dung bombs and the suit of armor outside Professor Quirrell's office." The fat lady tutted disapprovingly. "That poltergeist is incorrigible. Someone ought to warn the poor professor." "Oh, I've already sent word through the portrait network," Violet assured her. Sir Cadogan was delighted to pass the message along. He does so enjoy feeling useful. Emma watched this exchange with fascination, her earlier melancholy temporarily forgotten. "You have a whole communication system." Both portraits turned to her with matching expressions of delight, as if they'd just noticed a particularly interesting specimen. "Indeed we do," the fat lady beamed. "How else do you think we keep track of everything that happens in this castle? We're the eyes and ears of Hogwarts, dear. Well, the painted eyes and ears, anyway." Violet nodded enthusiastically. "Been watching over students for centuries. We have. It's rather our purpose, you might say. Can't have young people wandering about getting into trouble without proper supervision." "But you're just portraits, Emma said, then immediately flushed with embarrassment. I mean, I don't mean to be rude. It's just paintings. You mean, the fat lady laughed, not seeming offended in the least. Oh, my dear, we're so much more than that. We're memories given form, personalities preserved in pigment and magic. Each of us carries the essence of who we were in life, along with centuries of accumulated wisdom from watching over this school. A new voice joined the conversation as another portrait, this one showing a stern-looking wizard with a monocle, flickered into life in a frame near the stairs. Are we having a midnight salon? He inquired with dignified curiosity. How delightful. It's been ages since we've had a proper gathering. Professor Everard Violet exclaimed. I thought you were sleeping. My dear Violet, I was merely resting my eyes. One doesn't truly sleep when one is already deceased. He adjusted his monocle and peered at Emma with interest. And who might this young lady be? I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Emma Rosewood, she replied, standing and offering a small curtsy that felt appropriate given the formal way he spoke. First year Gryffindor. Ah, a newcomer. Professor Everard's painted features brightened considerably. How wonderful. Tell me, Miss Rosewood, what brings you to our midnight gathering? Surely not insomnia alone. Emma hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to these painted strangers. But there was something deeply comforting about their presence, something that reminded her of the grandmother she'd lost 2 years ago, that same combination of gentle authority and genuine interest in her well-being. I suppose I'm feeling rather displaced, she admitted quietly. Everything here is so different from what I'm used to. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly fit in. The portraits exchanged meaningful glances, and Emma caught a sense of some unspoken communication passing between them. My dear child, the fat lady said gently, would it help to know that every student who has ever walked these halls has felt exactly the same way? Even Harry Potter, Emma asked, thinking of the famous boy who seemed to navigate the wizarding world with such natural ease. Professor Everard chuckled. Especially Mr. Potter, I should think. The poor boy arrived here knowing absolutely nothing about our world, thrust into circumstances that would challenge even the most experienced wizard. Yet look how well he's adapted. But he's special, Emma protested. He's the boy who lived. Everyone knows him. Fame and belonging are entirely different things, Violet observed wisely. If anything, Mr. Potter's notoriety makes it harder for him to find genuine connections. At least you have the luxury of discovering who you are without the weight of public expectation. The fat lady leaned forward, conspiratorially. Would you like to hear about some of the other students we've watched over the years? The ones who felt just as lost as you do now? Emma nodded eagerly, settling back into her chair and pulling her dressing gown more tightly around herself. There was a boy in the 1970s, the fat lady began, her voice taking on the rhythm of a well-practiced storyteller. Marcus Thornfield, a muggle-born Ravenclaw who was absolutely convinced he'd been sorted into the wrong house. Brilliant mind, but he thought he wasn't clever enough to keep up with his housemates. What happened to him? Emma asked. He became one of the most respected arithmancy professors Hogwarts ever had, Professor Everard replied with evident pride. Taught here for 30 years before retiring to write textbooks. His theories on numerical divination are still considered groundbreaking. Violet picked up the thread of the story. But during his first month, He used to sit right where you're sitting, crying into his homework and planning to write to his parents, begging them to take him home. He did? Emma's eyes widened. Oh yes, the fat lady confirmed. Nearly every portrait in Ravenclaw Tower took turns talking him through those first few weeks. We've all got rather good at spotting the signs of homesickness over the centuries. More portraits began materializing in empty frames around the common room, drawn by the sound of conversation. Emma recognized some of them from her daily passages through the corridors. A knight in dented armor, a witch in elaborate Tudor dress, a scholar with ink-stained fingers, and several others whose names she didn't know, but whose faces had become familiar fixtures of Hogwarts life. Are we telling stories about homesick students? The Tudor witch inquired with interest. Oh, I do love these tales. So encouraging for the young ones. Indeed we are, Lady Catherine, Professor Everard replied. Miss Rosewood here is experiencing the perfectly normal adjustment difficulties that come with entering our world. Lady Catherine's painted features softened with sympathy. My dear child, I've been watching over Hogwarts students for nearly 400 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what you're feeling is not only normal, but necessary. The discomfort you're experiencing is simply your spirit expanding to accommodate all the wonders you're discovering. It doesn't feel like expanding, Emma admitted. It feels like drowning. The knight in dented armor shifted forward, his painted metal clanking softly. I understand that sensation completely. When I first arrived at Hogwarts as a living student, I was so overwhelmed that I spent my first week hiding in the dungeons, convinced I was entirely unsuited for magical education. You were a student here, Emma asked with surprise. Sir Barnabas the Bewildered, at your service, he replied with a courtly bow that made his armor rattle. Hufflepuff, class of 1385. Took me nearly 2 months to work up the courage to speak to another student, and even then, I could barely manage more than a stutter. But you seem so confident now, Emma observed. Sir Barnabas laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the common room with golden light. Confidence, dear girl, is not the absence of fear or uncertainty. It's the decision to act despite those feelings. Hogwarts taught me that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. The scholar with ink-stained fingers leaned forward in his frame. And wisdom isn't about knowing everything from the start. It's about being curious enough to keep learning, humble enough to ask questions, and patient enough to let understanding develop naturally. The magic of Hogwarts, Violet added softly, isn't just in the spells and potions you'll learn in class. It's in the gradual transformation that happens when you allow yourself to become part of this community. When you stop trying so hard to fit in and simply focus on being genuinely yourself. Emma felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from an overwhelming sense of being understood and accepted. How do you know exactly what to say? The fat lady's expression grew infinitely gentle. Because we've been here, dear one. Not in the same way you are now, but we've all experienced that moment of standing on the threshold between one life and another, wondering if we're brave enough to step forward into the unknown. And more importantly, Professor Everard added, we've watched thousands of students make that same journey. We've seen shy children become confident leaders, uncertain teenagers discover their true calling, and homesick first years grow into adults who consider Hogwarts their truest home. A comfortable silence fell over the group, broken only by the soft crackling of the dying fire and the distant sound of wind whistling through the castle's ancient stones. Emma gazed around at the assembled portraits, these painted guardians who had chosen to spend their midnight hours comforting a lonely first year, and felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of anxiety she'd been carrying since arriving at Hogwarts. "You really watch over all of us?" she asked quietly. "Every single one," Lady Catherine confirmed. "It's our joy and our purpose. We remember every student who has passed through these halls, and we hold space for all of those yet to come." Sir Barnabas nodded gravely. "We are the memory keepers of Hogwarts, the guardians of its heart and soul. And you, dear Emma Rosewood, are now part of that great tapestry of stories we helped to weave." The scholar smiled warmly. "Tomorrow, when you're sitting in class, feeling overwhelmed by a difficult lesson, remember that we're here. When you're walking the corridors, feeling lost and alone, know that painted eyes are watching over you with love and hope. And when you're lying in bed, unable to sleep," Violet added, with a mischievous twinkle in her painted eyes, "know that you're always welcome to join our midnight conversations. We're rather good company, even if we do say so ourselves." Emma laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine warmth. "Thank you, all of you. I don't think I realized how much I needed to hear this." The fat lady beamed with maternal satisfaction. "Oh, my dear child, this is what we're here for. Hogwarts takes care of its own, and now you're part of that tradition." As if responding to some invisible signal, the portraits began to fade back into their frames, offering gentle good nights and encouraging smiles. Soon, only the fat lady remained fully present, her kind eyes fixed on Emma with warm affection. "Will you be able to sleep now, do you think?" she asked softly. Emma stood and stretched, surprised to find that her earlier restlessness had completely disappeared. "I think so. Thank you, truly." "Think nothing of it, dear." "And Emma," the fat lady's voice stopped her as she headed toward the stairs. "Remember that belonging isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose, day by day, moment by moment. You belong here because you choose to be here, to learn and grow and contribute to our community." Emma climbed the stairs to her dormitory with a lightness in her step that had been absent for weeks. As she slipped back into bed, she could hear the faint murmur of portrait voices drifting up from the common room, the gentle sound of guardians keeping their eternal watch over the students in their care. For the first time since arriving at Hogwarts, Emma Rosewood fell asleep, not to the sound of her own worried thoughts, but to the comforting knowledge that she was surrounded by love and protection, watched over by painted guardians who had chosen to dedicate their afterlives to nurturing young minds and hearts. She was not alone. She had never been alone. And somehow that made all the difference in the world. The scent first caught Emma's attention during her morning walk to the Great Hall, a subtle fragrance that seemed oddly out of place among the usual castle aromas of stone dust, burning candles, and the lingering traces of breakfast bacon. It was something green and growing like fresh mint mixed with lavender. Something else she couldn't quite identify. Something that reminded her of her grandmother's herb garden on summer mornings. She paused in the corridor between the entrance hall and the great hall, turning her head like a hound following a scent trail. The other students flowed around her, chattering about the upcoming potions exam and speculating about whether Professor Snape would actually allow them to use their notes. But Emma found herself increasingly distracted by that tantalizingly familiar smell, which seemed to grow stronger near a tapestry depicting a medieval feast. "Are you quite all right?" Hermione's voice broke through her distraction. The bushy-haired girl had stopped beside her, books clutched to her chest, and a look of mild concern on her face. "Do you smell that?" Emma asked, inhaling deeply. "It's like herbs, something growing." Hermione paused and sniffed delicately, her expression thoughtful. "I can't say I notice anything unusual. Perhaps it's coming from the kitchens, though I'm not entirely certain where they are located." "The kitchens are in the dungeons," a voice piped up behind them. Neville Longbottom approached hesitantly, his round face pink with the exertion of hurrying to catch up. "My gran told me they're behind a portrait of fruit, though I've never actually looked for them myself." Emma's curiosity intensified. "Behind a portrait of fruit?" "That's what she said," Neville replied, then blushed deeper. "Not that I've been exploring or anything. Well, Gran knows things about Hogwarts. She went here herself, you see." The herbal scent seemed to pulse stronger, as if calling to her. Emma found herself taking a step toward the tapestry, then another. "I think it's coming from this direction." Hermione checked her pocket watch with the efficiency of someone who planned their day down to the minute. "We really should get to breakfast. Professor McGonagall mentioned there would be an announcement about the upcoming Transfiguration practical, and I don't want to miss." "You go ahead," Emma said, already moving toward the tapestry. "I'll catch up in a moment." She heard Hermione's disapproving sigh and Neville's uncertain shuffle, but the scent was growing stronger, and with it came an inexplicable sense that this was important, that whatever was producing this wonderful smell was something she needed to discover. The tapestry, she realized as she examined it more closely, wasn't hanging quite straight. A closer inspection revealed a narrow gap between its edge and the wall, just wide enough for a person to slip through if they turned sideways. The herbal fragrance was definitely emanating from that hidden space. Emma glanced around to ensure she wasn't being observed, then carefully squeezed through the gap. The space beyond was not what she had expected. Instead of a cramped passageway or storage closet, she found herself in a circular chamber with a low, vaulted ceiling that glowed with the same warm light as the great hall candles. The walls were lined with shelves and small alcoves, and every available surface held clay pots of varying sizes, each one sprouting herbs and plants in various stages of growth. But most surprising of all was the small figure tending to the plants, a house elf no taller than Emma's waist, wearing what appeared to be a tea towel fashioned into a simple tunic. The elf's large tennis ball-sized eyes were focused intently on a pot of what looked like silver-leafed sage, and its long, graceful fingers moved with practiced precision as it pruned away dead growth. "Oh," Emma exclaimed softly, startled by the unexpected sight. The house elf jumped nearly a foot in the air, dropping its tiny pruning shears with a metallic clatter. When it landed, it immediately dropped into a deep bow, its large ears nearly brushing the floor. "Mrs. Finding Pip's secret place," the elf said, in a voice that managed to combine mortification with resignation. Pip is being very sorry for worrying the young miss. Pip will be punishing himself immediately. For no, Emma interrupted, alarmed by the elf's distress. Please, don't punish yourself. I'm the one who should apologize for intruding. The smell was so lovely, and I was curious. The elf. Pip slowly raised its head, large eyes blinking in apparent confusion. Miss is not being angry with Pip. Of course not, Emma said gently, crouching down to bring herself closer to the elf's eye level. I'm Emma, by the way. Emma Rosewood. And you're Pip. The elf nodded cautiously, still looking ready to bolt at the first sign of displeasure. Pip is tending the healing garden for Madame Pomfrey, miss. Pip grows the herbs that cannot be bought, the ones that must be picked fresh under moonlight or watered with morning dew. Emma looked around the chamber with new eyes, taking in the careful organization of the plants, the way each pot was positioned to catch optimal light, and the obvious care that had gone into creating this hidden sanctuary. This is incredible. You did all of this yourself. A tiny spark of pride flickered in Pip's enormous eyes. Pip has been tending plants since Pip was very small. Pip's mother taught Pip before Pip came to work at Hogwarts alone. There was something in the elf's voice that made Emma's chest tighten with sympathy. She settled more comfortably on the floor, mindful not to make any sudden movements that might startle her new acquaintance. How long have you been at Hogwarts? 15 years, miss, Pip replied, relaxing slightly, as it became clear that Emma meant no harm. Pip came when Pip was very young, after the old house elf family served went away. Hogwarts is being very kind to Pip, giving Pip important work to do. Emma noticed the way Pip's voice grew warmer when talking about its work, and she gestured toward the thriving garden around them. This is definitely important work. These plants are beautiful, and they smell amazing. Pip's chest puffed out with unmistakable pride. Mrs. liking the garden. Pip works very hard to make sure all the plants are happy and healthy. Each one has different needs, different songs they like to hear while they grow. Songs Emma asked with genuine curiosity. Oh yes, miss. Pip's enthusiasm overcame its earlier nervousness, and it scurried over to a pot containing what looked like tiny silver bells growing on delicate stems. This is Moonbell Mint. It only grows properly if you sing to it in the old house elf language while the moon is waning. And over there, it pointed to a cluster of purple flowers that seemed to shimmer in the magical light. Those are Dreamy's blossoms. They help students sleep peacefully, but they must be told bedtime stories while they bloom, or they become bitter. Emma found herself enchanted by the elf's obvious expertise and passion. You tell bedtime stories to flowers. Pip nodded solemnly. Plants are being very much like people, miss. They need care and attention and kindness to grow properly. Pip tells them about the good things happening at Hogwarts. Students learning new spells, professors being proud of their classes, friends helping friends with difficult homework. Happy stories make happy plants, and happy plants make better healing potions. The simple wisdom of this statement struck Emma forcefully. She thought about her own struggles with homesickness, how the kindness of the portraits had helped her feel more settled, and realized that perhaps plants weren't so different from people after all. Would you mind showing me more? She asked hesitantly. I promise I won't touch anything without permission. Pip's face lit up like sunrise, and Emma realized This might be the first time anyone had shown genuine interest in its work. Miss would like to learn about the healing plants. Very much, Emma confirmed. For the next hour, Pip led her on a tour of the secret garden, explaining the properties and care requirements of each plant with the enthusiasm of a true expert. There were wound-healing herbs that required precise amounts of morning sunlight, fever-reducing roots that thrived on classical music, and sleeping draughts ingredients that needed to be harvested during thunderstorms to maintain their potency. This one, Pip said, stopping before a particularly unusual plant that looked like a cross between a fern and a small tree. This is Pip's most special plant. It is called memory moss, and it helps people who are forgetting important things remember them again. Emma studied the plant with interest. Its fronds seemed to shimmer and shift, almost like they were showing her images from memories she couldn't quite grasp. Where did you find it? Pip didn't find it, miss, the elf replied softly. Pip grew it from a cutting that Pip's mother gave Pip before Pip came to Hogwarts. It reminds Pip of home, and it helps other people remember their homes too when they are feeling very far away. Emma felt a lump form in her throat. Do you miss your home very much? Pip considered this question with the seriousness it deserved. Pip misses Pip's mother and the old garden where Pip learned to grow things. But Hogwarts is being home now too. Different kind of home, but still home. Pip has important work here, and Pip helps take care of the students and make them feel better when they are hurt or sad. That's beautiful, Emma whispered, understanding flooding through her. You're not just growing plants, you're growing care. You're helping make Hogwarts feel like home for everyone. Pip's eyes grew even larger, if that were possible, and Emma could see tears forming in their depths. Misunderstands. Most people are not seeing what house elves really do. They think house elves only clean and cook and do invisible work. But house elves are making magic happen in quiet ways, making sure students have warm beds and good food and healing herbs when they need them. House elves are helping to build the feeling of home. Emma found herself deeply moved by the elf's words and the obvious love that went into every aspect of its work. I had no idea. I'm ashamed to admit, I barely thought about house elves at all before coming to Hogwarts. Most students don't, Pip replied, without any trace of bitterness. House elves are meant to work invisibly, but sometimes, when a student is needing extra care, house elves can be more visible. Pip thinks Miss Emma is needing extra care right now. Emma's eyes widened. How did you know? Pip smiled, an expression of such gentle wisdom that it transformed its elfin features entirely. House elves are very good at sensing when people are feeling displaced or homesick. It is part of house elf magic, being able to feel what others need and provide it. Pip has been watching Miss Emma in the Great Hall, and Pip can tell Miss Emma is still learning how to feel at home at Hogwarts. Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, both from being so clearly seen and understood, and from the kindness behind that recognition. I'm homesick, she admitted. Everything here is so different from what I'm used to. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever really belong. Pip moved closer and, with surprising gentleness, patted Emma's hand with one of its own small ones. Pip thinks Miss Emma is understanding belonging wrongly. Belonging is not being the same as everyone else. Belonging is finding the place where your gifts are needed and appreciated. But I don't know what my gifts are, Emma protested. I'm not particularly good at magic. I'm not brave like other Gryffindors, and I certainly don't have any special talents like growing healing plants. Pip's expression grew thoughtful. Would Miss Emma like to help Pip with the garden sometimes? Not because Miss Emma must, but because Miss Emma seems to have the kind of heart that understands why plants need stories and songs. Emma felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. You'd let me help? Really? Pip would be very happy for the company, the elf replied warmly, and Pip thinks that maybe Miss Emma has more gifts than she knows. Today, Miss Emma was the first person ever to find Pip's garden by following her nose and her heart. That is a kind of magic too. As if to emphasize this point, the memory moss shimmered more brightly, and Emma could swear she caught a glimpse of her mother's face in its fronds, smiling with the same gentle encouragement she remembered from childhood. The plants like you, Pip observed with satisfaction. They can sense that you have a caring spirit. That is the most important gift for this kind of work. Emma spent another hour in the secret garden, learning the basic care techniques for several of the hardier plants, and listening to Pip's stories about the healing work done at Hogwarts. She discovered that house elf magic was far more complex and beautiful than she had ever imagined. Not just the flashy spellcasting she associated with wizards, but a deeper magic of nurturing and care, of creating the conditions where others could flourish. I should probably get to my next class, Emma finally said, reluctantly, noticing how much time had passed. Pip nodded understandingly. Miss Emma can come back any time. Pip is usually here in the early mornings and late evenings, when the plants need the most attention. Emma stood and brushed off her robes, but found herself hesitating at the hidden entrance. Pip, thank you. Not just for showing me the garden, but for helping me understand what belonging really means. The house elf's smile was radiant. Pip is very happy to help. And Miss Emma, remember that belonging is not something that happens all at once. It grows slowly, like plants, with patience and care and the right conditions. Hogwarts is providing the right conditions. Miss Emma just needs to give herself time to grow. As Emma slipped back through the gap in the tapestry, she carried with her more than just the lingering scent of herbs and growing things. She carried a new understanding of the invisible network of care that made Hogwarts feel like home. The house elves who worked tirelessly to create comfort and healing. The portraits who watched over students with painted eyes full of love. And all the other unseen magics that wove together to create the tapestry of belonging. For the first time since arriving at Hogwarts, Emma felt like she had found something she could contribute not through grand gestures or exceptional magical ability, but through the simple act of caring, of paying attention to the quiet needs around her, and of understanding that home was created not by magic alone, but by countless small acts of love and service. Walking toward her next class, Emma realized that she no longer felt like an outsider looking in. She felt like someone who was beginning to understand her place in the great web of care that made Hogwarts more than just a school. It made it a home for anyone willing to both give and receive the magic of belonging. The scent of herbs still clung to her robes, a gentle reminder of the secret garden and the wise house elf who had shown her that the most powerful magic of all was often the quietest. The December night was crystalline clear, the kind of evening where the Scottish Highlands seemed to stretch endlessly under a canopy of stars so brilliant they made Emma's breath catch in her throat. She climbed the winding stone steps of the astronomy tower carefully, her dragon hide gloves gripping the cold metal railing as she balanced her telescope case and star charts in her other arm. "Careful there, Miss Rosewood," came Professor Sinistra's melodious voice from above. "The steps can be treacherous when frost forms on the stone." Emma looked up to see the astronomy professor's silhouette outlined against the star-filled sky, her midnight blue robes billowing gently in the winter breeze. Professor Aurora Sinistra had always struck Emma as someone who belonged to the night. Her dark skin seemed to absorb starlight, and her movements held the graceful precision of someone accustomed to navigating by celestial bodies. "Thank you, Professor," Emma replied, taking extra care with her footing as she completed the climb to the tower's open platform. The astronomy tower at night was a place transformed. Gone was the daytime view of Hogwarts grounds and the distant mountains. Instead, the world had become infinite, opening upward into a vast dome of possibilities. Several other students were already present, a small group of first years who, like Emma, were struggling with the complexities of celestial navigation and star identification. "Gather round, everyone," Professor Sinistra called softly, her voice carrying easily in the crisp air. "Tonight's conditions are exceptional for our purposes. The atmosphere is remarkably clear, and we have a new moon, which means minimal light pollution for our observations." Emma set up her telescope alongside the others, fumbling slightly with the adjustment knobs in her thick gloves. Beside her, Susan Bones from Hufflepuff was having similar difficulties, while across the platform, Padma Patil from Ravenclaw had her equipment ready with characteristic efficiency. "Before we begin our formal observations," Professor Sinistra continued, moving among them with practiced ease, "I want you to simply look up. Don't use your telescopes yet. Just look with your eyes and tell me what you see." Emma tilted her head back and gasped. Away from the castle's torches and magical lighting, the night sky revealed itself in all its stunning complexity. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light, and stars she had never noticed before sparkled with varying intensities and colors. "It's incredible," Susan whispered beside her. "I never realized there were so many." "The ancient wizards," Professor Sinistra said, her voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller, "believed that each star was a connection point between our world and the realm of pure magic. They thought that by studying the patterns of celestial movement, they could understand the deeper currents of magical energy that flow through all things." Emma found herself captivated not just by the stars themselves, but by the professor's obvious reverence for them. "Is that true, Professor? About the connections to magic?" Professor Sinistra smiled, her teeth white against her dark skin. "Who can say for certain? But I can tell you that Hogwarts was built in this precise location, partly because of its stellar alignments. The founders chose this site not just for its isolation and natural magical properties, but because certain constellations would pass directly overhead at significant times of the year." She gestured toward a bright cluster of stars in the eastern sky. "Do you see that constellation there? the one that looks rather like a cauldron. Emma squinted upward, trying to make out the pattern Professor Sinistra indicated. Gradually, she began to see how the stars could be connected to form the outline of a magical cauldron, complete with what might be steam rising from its rim. That's the cauldron of Ceridwen, Professor Sinistra explained. In Celtic mythology, Ceridwen was a goddess of transformation and wisdom. The ancient wizards who founded Hogwarts believed that when her constellation was directly overhead, it was an auspicious time for magical learning and personal transformation. "When does it appear overhead?" asked Padma with scientific curiosity. "During the winter solstice," Professor Sinistra replied, "which, as you might have noticed, is approaching rapidly. In fact, if my calculations are correct, it should be perfectly positioned at midnight on December 21st, just 9 days from now." Emma felt a thrill of excitement at the thought of witnessing such a significant celestial event. "Will we be able to observe it?" "Indeed we will," the professor confirmed with a warm smile. "In fact, there's an old Hogwarts tradition associated with the winter solstice alignment. Students who are interested are invited to participate in the Starlight Vigil, an all-night observation session where we track the constellation's passage and perform the blessing of the boundaries." "The blessing of the boundaries," Susan echoed curiously. Professor Sinistra's expression grew more serious, though no less kind. "It's an ancient protective ritual that helps strengthen Hogwarts' magical defenses. The students, staff, and even some of the magical creatures of the grounds come together to renew the spells that keep the school safe and hidden from unwelcome attention." Emma's imagination was immediately captured by the idea of participating in such an ancient tradition. "What does it involve, Patience, Miss Rosewood?" Professor Sinistra chuckled. "First, you need to master the basics of stellar observation. Tonight's lesson is about learning to read the night sky, as our ancestors did, to see not just individual stars, but the stories and patterns they create together." She moved to the center of the platform and pointed her wand upward. With a gentle flick, tiny points of golden light appeared in the air above them, mimicking the positions of the brightest stars. "This is the constellation Draco, the dragon. Can anyone tell me why it might be significant to Hogwarts?" Several hands went up, and Emma found herself raising hers as well, though she wasn't entirely certain of her answer. "Miss Patel, because dragons are magical creatures and their constellation might influence magical energy," Padma suggested. "A reasonable hypothesis," Professor Sinistra nodded. "But the connection is more specific than that. Draco is the constellation that guards the North Star, Polaris, our most reliable navigational reference. In magical theory, this makes it a symbol of constancy and protection. The founders positioned Hogwarts so that Draco would always be visible from this tower, representing the school's eternal commitment to safeguarding its students." Emma felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold winter air. There was something profoundly moving about the idea that the very stars above them were part of Hogwarts' protective magic, that the castle had been positioned with such care and foresight. "Miss Rosewood," Professor Sinistra called gently, "you look thoughtful. What are you considering?" Emma hesitated, then decided to voice the question that had been growing in her mind. "Professor, if Hogwarts was built to align with the stars, does that mean we're all part of something much larger than just a school? Something cosmic?" The professor's smile broadened with genuine delight. What an excellent question. Yes, I believe we are. Every student who has ever walked these halls, every spell that has been cast within these walls, every act of learning and growth, all of it happens under the same stars that guided the founders 1,000 years ago. She gestured broadly at the night sky. Those stars have watched over centuries of Hogwarts students. They've seen shy first years become confident graduates, witnessed friendships that lasted lifetimes, and observed the quiet miracles of young people discovering their true potential. Emma found herself overwhelmed by the vastness of this perspective. To think that she was part of an unbroken chain of students stretching back through history, all connected by their shared experience under these same stars. It's rather humbling, isn't it? Susan murmured beside her, apparently having similar thoughts. And inspiring, added a voice from behind them. Emma turned to see Neville Longbottom climbing the last few steps to the platform, slightly out of breath, but carrying his telescope with careful determination. Mr. Longbottom, Professor Sinistra greeted him warmly. I'm pleased you decided to join us. I know astronomy isn't your strongest subject, but tonight's session is less about technical observation and more about understanding our place in the larger magical cosmos. Neville's round face lit up with relief and interest. That sounds much more manageable than trying to calculate planetary trajectories. Professor Sinistra laughed gently. Oh, don't worry. We'll get to planetary trajectories eventually. But first, I want you all to understand why astronomy matters to wizards and witches. It's not just about predicting magical tides or timing potion ingredients, though those applications are certainly important. She moved to the edge of the platform and leaned against the stone parapet, gazing out at the star-filled sky. Astronomy teaches us perspective. When you're struggling with a difficult transfiguration assignment or worried about upcoming exams, it can help to remember that your troubles are taking place under the same vast sky that has witnessed countless generations of similar struggles. Emma nodded, thinking of her recent homesickness and feelings of displacement. It makes our problems seem smaller, but also more universal. Exactly, Professor Sinistra confirmed with approval. Your challenges are both uniquely yours and part of the human experience that stretches back to the beginning of time. The stars remind us that we are simultaneously insignificant in the cosmic sense and infinitely precious as individual sparks of consciousness capable of contemplating the universe itself. A comfortable silence fell over the group as they absorbed this philosophical reflection. Emma found herself gazing upward with new eyes, seeing not just points of light, but witnesses to the grand pageant of human experience. Professor, Padma asked eventually, you mentioned that some magical creatures participate in the Starlight Vigil. What did you mean by that? Professor Sinistra's expression grew mysterious and delighted. Ah, well, you'll have to wait and see, won't you? But I will say this. Hogwarts' magical ecosystem extends far beyond the castle walls. The centaurs in the Forbidden Forest are exceptional astronomers, and they have their own relationship with the celestial cycles. The Thestrals, too, seem to be particularly active during significant astronomical events. Emma's pulse quickened with excitement. The thought of participating in a magical ritual that brought together students, staff, and magical creatures under the stars was almost too wonderful to believe. Will we really be able to participate? She asked, hopefully. Any student who demonstrates a genuine appreciation for astronomical study and a respectful attitude toward magical traditions is welcome to join, Professor Sinistra replied. Though I should warn you, it involves staying awake all night, and December nights in the Scottish Highlands can be quite cold. I don't mind the cold, Emma said quickly, and realized she truly meant it. The idea of spending an entire night under the stars participating in a tradition that connected her to centuries of Hogwarts history was worth any amount of discomfort. Nor do I, Susan added with determination, while Neville nodded agreement, despite looking slightly nervous about the prospect. Professor Sinistra clapped her hands together with satisfaction. Excellent. Then we have our volunteers for this year's Starlight Vigil. But first, you'll need to complete some preparatory work. I want each of you to spend the next week doing nightly observations, tracking the movement of the cauldron of Ceridwen as it approaches its solstice position. She handed each of them a specially designed star chart, marked with measurement grids and observation notes. Record the constellation's position each night at the same time. I suggest 11 o'clock, which should give you time to finish your regular homework. Note any changes in its apparent brightness, position relative to other celestial markers, and your own emotional or magical responses to the observation process. Emma accepted her star chart with reverence, understanding that she was being entrusted with something important. Our magical responses, Professor? Many witches and wizards find that prolonged celestial observation enhances their sensitivity to magical currents, Professor Sinistra explained. You might notice changes in how easily spells come to you, or increased awareness of the magical properties of your surroundings. These effects are usually subtle, but they're worth noting. As the formal lesson concluded and the students began packing up their equipment, Emma lingered on the platform, reluctant to leave the vast openness of the star-filled night for the enclosed corridors of the castle below. Miss Rosewood, Professor Sinistra approached quietly. I hope you don't mind my saying so, but you seem to have found something up here tonight. Something you were looking for, perhaps. Emma considered the question carefully, gazing up at the brilliant stars one more time. I think I found perspective, Professor, and maybe a sense of belonging that's bigger than just fitting in with my classmates. Professor Sinistra nodded with understanding. The night sky has a way of putting things in their proper proportion. Your place at Hogwarts, your place in the magical world, is not separate from the larger cosmos. It's part of it. You are part of an ancient tradition of learning and growth that stretches back to the first witch or wizard who looked up at the stars and wondered what they meant. Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though whether from the cold air or from the profound sense of connection she was experiencing, she couldn't say. Thank you, Professor, for helping me see that. The stars did the work, Professor Sinistra replied gently. I merely provided the proper viewing conditions. As Emma descended the winding stairs of the astronomy tower, her mind was full of starlight and infinite possibilities. She carried her telescope case and star chart carefully, treasures that would help her participate in the ancient rhythm of celestial observation that connected her to countless generations of magical students. For the first time since arriving at Hogwarts, Emma felt truly part of something vast and beautiful and eternal. The stars that had watched over the castle for 1,000 years would continue to watch over her, and someday, when she was grown and gone, they would watch over other uncertain first years who needed to understand their place in the grand pattern of the universe. Walking through the corridors toward Gryffindor Tower, Emma no longer felt small or displaced. She felt connected to the stars, to Hogwarts, to the ancient tradition of seeking wisdom under the infinite sky, and in 9 days, she would help renew the magical boundaries that kept this special place safe for future generations of students who would also look up at the stars and find their place among them. The night had given her more than astronomical knowledge. It had given her a cosmic perspective on belonging, the understanding that home wasn't just a place on Earth, but a position in the vast community of consciousness that stretched from the castle grounds to the farthest star. January at Hogwarts arrived with a vengeance, bringing not just the bitter cold of a Scottish winter, but the mounting pressure of approaching examinations that seemed to loom over the castle like storm clouds. Emma found herself caught in the familiar cycle of academic anxiety that had plagued her since childhood, the gnawing worry that she wasn't working hard enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't prepared enough for whatever challenges lay ahead. The library, usually her sanctuary, had become a battlefield of stressed students competing for the best tables and the most relevant books. Madam Pince prowled the stacks with even more vigilance than usual, her sharp eyes ready to pounce on any student who dared whisper above the approved volume level. The common rooms of all houses buzzed with the nervous energy of first years comparing notes and sharing horror stories about the difficulty of upcoming practicals. Emma clutched her Transfiguration textbook and a roll of parchment covered in increasingly frantic notes as she wandered the corridors, looking for somewhere, anywhere, quiet enough to concentrate. She had tried the Gryffindor common room, but Fred and George Weasley were testing what appeared to be exploding quills, filling the space with intermittent bangs and sulphurous smoke. The Great Hall was too echoey, amplifying every conversation into a distracting hum. Even the usually peaceful library had been invaded by a group of third years engaged in heated whisper arguments about the proper wand movement for the cheering charm. "I just need somewhere quiet," Emma muttered to herself, pausing in a corridor she didn't immediately recognize. The frustration in her voice surprised her. She wasn't usually one to complain aloud, even to herself. "Somewhere I can think without distractions, without pressure, without feeling like everyone else is more prepared than I am." She leaned against the cold stone wall, closing her eyes and trying to calm the anxious flutter in her chest. The upcoming potions practical particularly worried her. Professor Snape had a way of making even successful students feel incompetent, and Emma's confidence in her brewing abilities was already shaky at best. When she opened her eyes, Emma found herself looking at a door that definitely hadn't been there moments before. It was a simple wooden door, painted a warm sage green with brass hinges that gleamed softly in the torchlight. A small brass nameplate read simply, "Study Room, currently available." Emma blinked hard and looked again, certain she must be imagining things. But the door remained stubbornly real, and more puzzling still, It seemed to radiate an aura of calm and welcome that was entirely at odds with the academic stress coursing through the rest of the castle. Glancing around to ensure she wasn't being observed, Emma tried the handle. The door opened smoothly, revealing a space that made her gasp with delight and relief. The room was everything she could have wished for, and several things she hadn't even known she wanted. It was neither too large nor too small, perhaps twice the size of a typical dormitory, with stone walls softened by warm tapestries in gentle earth tones. A fireplace crackled cheerfully along one wall, filling the space with dancing light and cozy warmth. Comfortable armchairs upholstered in soft brown leather were arranged around low tables, each positioned to catch optimal light from both the fire and the tall windows that offered views of snow-covered grounds. But most wonderful of all were the books. The walls were lined with shelves containing exactly the texts Emma needed, not just her required textbooks, but supplementary materials she'd heard mentioned in class, but never been able to locate. There were study guides with clear, encouraging explanations of difficult concepts, practice problems with worked solutions, and even what appeared to be collections of successful student essays from previous years. "This is impossible," Emma whispered, setting her materials down on the nearest table. Yet even as she spoke the words, she found herself sinking into one of the comfortable chairs with a sigh of pure contentment. The chair seemed to adjust itself to her body, providing perfect support for her back and arms. The table was exactly the right height for writing, and when she opened her Transfiguration textbook, the firelight fell across the pages at precisely the angle needed to avoid glare while providing clear visibility. Emma had been studying for perhaps 20 minutes, already making more progress than she'd managed in hours elsewhere, when the door opened quietly behind her. "Ah," came a surprised voice. "I'm so sorry. I thought this room was empty." Emma turned to see a Hufflepuff girl about her own age standing uncertainly in the doorway. The girl had curly auburn hair and a round, pleasant face currently creased with embarrassment. "Please, come in," Emma said quickly, recognizing the same desperate look she'd been wearing herself. "There's plenty of space. Honestly, I could use the company. I'm Emma, by the way. Emma Rosewood." The girl's face brightened considerably. "Hannah Abbott. And thank you. I've been looking for somewhere quiet for ages. The Hufflepuff common room is lovely, but with everyone cramming for exams, it's rather intense." Hannah settled into a chair across from Emma, pulling out her own stack of books and parchment. Emma noticed they were studying many of the same subjects, though Hannah's herbology notes were far more extensive and organized than her own. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling fire providing a soothing backdrop to the scratch of quills and the occasional rustle of turning pages. Emma found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since returning to school after the Christmas holidays. There was something about this room that seemed to absorb anxiety and replace it with calm focus. "This is strange," Hannah said eventually, looking up from her defense against the dark arts essay. "I've never seen this room before, and I thought I'd explored most of the castle by now." Emma glanced around with renewed curiosity. "Neither have I, but it appeared just when I needed it most. Rather convenient, don't you think?" Before Hannah could respond, the door opened again, admitting a Ravenclaw boy with sandy hair and an armload of astronomy charts. "Excuse me," he said hesitantly, "but is this room available for study? I saw the sign on the door, and I'm rather desperate for somewhere quiet to work on these star charts." "Of course," Emma and Hannah replied almost simultaneously, then smiled at each other. The boy, who introduced himself as Anthony Goldstein, settled at another table with evident relief. Soon, a fourth student arrived, Blaise Zabini from Slytherin, who looked slightly suspicious of the mixed house gathering, but was apparently desperate enough for study space to set aside house prejudices. As the afternoon wore on, Emma found herself part of an unlikely but harmonious study group. Anthony helped her with some particularly tricky astronomical calculations, while Hannah shared her beautifully organized herbology notes. Even Blaise proved surprisingly helpful, offering insights into potions techniques that made Emma's brewing confidence grow considerably. "You know," Hannah said during a brief break, when they'd all paused to warm their hands by the fire, "I was dreading the upcoming practicals. But working together like this, everything seems much more manageable." Anthony nodded enthusiastically. "It's amazing how much clearer things become when you can discuss them with people who are struggling with the same concepts." Emma looked around the room, taking in the comfortable furniture, the perfect lighting, the carefully curated collection of books, and the way the space seemed to encourage both concentration and collaboration. Has anyone else noticed how perfectly this room suits our needs? I mean, it has exactly the books we need, exactly the right furniture arrangement, even exactly the right temperature. Blay, who had been listening quietly while organizing his potions notes, looked up with interest. "Now that you mention it, this room does seem rather tailored to our requirements." "Maybe it's just a coincidence," Hannah suggested, though her tone indicated she didn't quite believe it herself. Anthony, whose Ravenclaw nature made him naturally curious about mysteries, stood and began examining the room more carefully. "Look at this," he called, from near the bookshelves. "These books aren't just randomly collected textbooks. They're specifically chosen to complement our coursework. Here's a volume on advanced transfiguration theory that explains exactly the concepts we're struggling with. And here's a collection of successful potions, brewing techniques organized by difficulty level." Emma joined him at the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of the volumes. "It's as if someone knew exactly what we needed and provided it." "Or," Blaise said thoughtfully, as if the room itself somehow knows what we need. This observation prompted a moment of contemplative silence as all four students considered the implications. Emma thought about the door appearing just when she'd expressed her desperate need for a quiet study space, about how perfectly everything in the room seemed designed for their comfort and academic success magic. Hannah said finally, with the simple acceptance that came from growing up in the wizarding world, "Hogwarts is full of magic. We don't understand yet. Maybe this room is just another example of the castle taking care of its students." The idea resonated strongly with Emma, who had been learning over the past months about the many ways Hogwarts looked after those within its walls. The portraits who watched over students, the house elves who provided invisible care, the very stones of the castle that seemed to radiate warmth and protection. "If that's true," she said slowly, "then this room appeared because we needed it, because we were all struggling with the same anxieties about exams and feeling overwhelmed by the pressure. Anthony returned to his seat, but his expression remained thoughtful. There are legends about rooms in Hogwarts that respond to need. My older brother mentioned something once about a room that provides whatever the person seeking it most requires. Do you think that's what this is? Hannah asked, looking around with new respect. I think, Emma said, settling back into her wonderfully comfortable chair, that it doesn't really matter what we call it. What matters is that we found each other here, and we're all better off for it. The truth of this statement was evident in the dramatic improvement in all their moods and academic confidence. Over the following hours, they worked through problems that had seemed insurmountable when tackled alone. Anthony's methodical Ravenclaw approach complemented Hannah's intuitive understanding of magical processes, while Blaze's analytical skills helped them all think more critically about their assumptions. Emma found that her own careful note-taking and patient explanation skills made her a valuable contributor to their informal study group. As the evening progressed, other students discovered their sanctuary. Terry Boot from Ravenclaw arrived looking harried and left an hour later with a much clearer understanding of charms theory. Susan Bones from Hufflepuff stopped by to borrow Hannah's herbology notes and stayed to help Emma with a particularly challenging transfiguration problem. Even Draco Malfoy appeared briefly, though he maintained his typical aloof demeanor while quietly benefiting from the collaborative atmosphere. You know what I find most interesting? Emma observed, as the group took another break, sharing a plate of biscuits that had appeared on one of the side tables without anyone noticing exactly when or how. We're all from different houses with different strengths and different approaches to learning, but working together, we're all more successful than we were struggling alone. Hannah nodded thoughtfully, munching on what appeared to be a perfectly baked chocolate chip biscuit. It's almost as if the sorting hat placed us in different houses not to keep us apart, but to ensure we developed different skills that we could eventually share with each other. This insight sparked an animated discussion about the true purpose of the house system. Blay, whose Slytherin perspective often differed from the others, suggested that perhaps the competition between houses was meant to push students to excel, while the underlying unity of Hogwarts provided the foundation for cooperation when it truly mattered. Anthony proposed that the four houses represented different aspects of human nature that needed to be developed and balanced. Maybe we're meant to learn from each other. Gryffindor courage, Hufflepuff loyalty, Ravenclaw wisdom, and Slytherin ambition. Maybe the ultimate goal is to become complete people who embody the best qualities of all four houses. Emma felt a thrill of recognition at this idea. It aligned perfectly with her growing understanding of Hogwarts as a place that helps students discover not just their magical abilities, but their full potential as human beings. If that's true, she said excitedly, then this room bringing us together across house lines to help each other succeed. It's helping us become the kind of people Hogwarts really wants us to be. As if responding to this insight, the room seemed to grow warmer and more welcoming. The fire burned a little brighter, the chairs became even more comfortable, and Emma could swear she felt a sense of approval emanating from the very walls. They continued studying until well past the time They should have returned to their dormitories, but none of them wanted to break the spell of productive harmony they discovered. When they finally began packing up their materials, Emma felt a pang of regret that their magical study session was ending. "Will we be able to find this room again?" she asked, voicing the concern they were all feeling. "I hope so," Hannah replied, carefully rolling up her parchment. "This has been the most productive study session I've ever had." Anthony paused in gathering his star charts. "Maybe the room will be here when we need it again. Maybe that's how it works. It appears when students genuinely need help and are open to helping each other." Blaze, who had maintained his typical reserve throughout most of the evening, but had nonetheless participated fully in their collaborative efforts, surprised them all by speaking with unusual warmth. "I've learned more tonight than in weeks of studying alone. Whatever this room is, wherever it comes from, I'm grateful for it." As they prepared to leave, Emma took one last look around the space that had provided such comfort and support. The fire was burning low now, casting long shadows across the comfortable furniture and well-stocked bookshelves. Tomorrow, she realized, she would face her exams with confidence instead of anxiety, armed not just with better understanding of the material, but with the knowledge that she was part of a community of learners who supported each other's success. "Thank you," she whispered to the room itself, though she felt slightly silly doing so. The fire flared briefly, as if acknowledging her gratitude, and Emma could have sworn she heard a gentle sigh of satisfaction from the walls themselves. Walking back through the corridors toward Gryffindor Tower, Emma reflected on the evening's revelations. She had discovered something far more valuable than study techniques or academic support. She had discovered that learning was not meant to be a solitary struggle, but a collaborative journey where different perspectives and strengths combine to help everyone succeed. The room that had appeared when she needed it most had taught her that Hogwarts' greatest magic was not in its spells or potions, but in its ability to bring together people who could help each other grow and thrive. And perhaps most importantly, she had learned that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, but the first step toward building the kind of community where everyone could flourish. As she climbed through the portrait hole into Gryffindor Tower, Emma carried with her not just improved academic confidence, but a deeper understanding of what it meant to be part of Hogwarts. She belonged here not because she was the smartest or most talented student, but because she was willing to both seek and offer help, to contribute her own gifts while gratefully accepting the gifts of others. The room that listened, whether it was magic or architecture or something beyond understanding, had shown her that home was not just a place that provided what you needed, but a place where you could provide what others needed too. And in that giving and receiving, in that mutual support and shared success, she had found the truest sense of belonging she had ever experienced. February 14th arrived at Hogwarts with all the fanfare of a particularly enthusiastic howler. Pink and red decorations had appeared overnight in the Great Hall, courtesy of what Emma suspected was Professor Flitwick's handiwork, and the very air seemed to shimmer with heart-shaped confetti that drifted down from the enchanted ceiling like romantic snow. Owls swooped through the hall delivering cards, flowers and boxes of sweets to blushing recipients, while others, sat empty-handed, trying to appear as though they hadn't been hoping for any Valentine's correspondence at all. Emma fell firmly into the latter category. She picked at her breakfast porridge, watching with a mixture of envy and embarrassment as Lavender Brown squealed over an enormous bouquet of roses that had just been delivered to the Gryffindor table. Even Hermione, who usually dismissed such frivolity, had received a small but elegant card that made her cheeks pink with pleasure. "Not hungry this morning?" asked nearly headless Nick, materializing beside Emma's seat, with a sudden appearance that still made her jump, despite months of familiarity. "Ah, hello, Sir Nicholas," Emma replied, grateful for the distraction. "I suppose I'm just not in a very festive mood." The Gryffindor ghost settled into a floating position that approximated sitting, his partially severed head tilting at an angle that would have been alarming if Emma hadn't grown accustomed to it. Our Valentine's Day blues. I remember them well, though it's been some time since I experienced them myself. Emma looked up with interest. "You celebrated Valentine's Day when you were alive." "Indeed I did," Nick replied with a nostalgic sigh that somehow managed to ruffle the tablecloth despite his incorporeal state. Though it was rather more complicated in my time. The courtly traditions, the elaborate poetry, the need to maintain proper propriety while still expressing one's deepest feelings. Rather exhausting, actually. Despite her melancholy mood, Emma found herself smiling slightly. "Did you have a Valentine? When you were living?" "I mean..." Nick's expression grew wistful, and his head wobbled precariously as he nodded. "Lady Eleanor Whitmore. Beautiful, intelligent, and possessed of the most delightful laugh. I spent months composing poems in her honor, practicing elaborate bows and generally making a fool of myself in the time-honored tradition of young men hopelessly in love." "What happened?" Emma asked, drawn into the story despite herself. "She married someone else," Nick replied matter-of-factly, though Emma could detect an echo of old pain in his voice. "Her earl with more land, more gold, and considerably more skill at staying alive than I possessed. Quite sensible of her, really." Emma felt a pang of sympathy for the ghost's long-ago heartbreak. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrible. At the time, I thought it was the end of the world," Nick admitted. "But you know what I discovered? Over the centuries, love takes many forms, and romantic love, while wonderful, is only one small part of the spectrum of human connection." He gestured around the great hall where students were chatting, laughing, sharing food, and generally enjoying each other's company in dozens of different ways. "Look around you, Miss Rosewood. Do you see only the couples exchanging valentines? Or do you also see the friendships being celebrated, the kindnesses being shared, the sense of community that makes this place special?" Emma followed his gaze and realized he was right. Yes, there were romantic gestures happening. Seamus Finnegan had somehow arranged for a singing telegram from a group of Cupid-costumed house elves, and several older students were exchanging elaborate gifts. But there were also friends sharing chocolates, study partners helping each other with difficult assignments, and the general warmth of a community celebrating affection in all its forms. "I suppose I was only seeing what I wasn't receiving," she admitted quietly. "A perfectly natural response," Nick assured her. "But perhaps today would be a good day to expand your perspective on what it means to be loved and to give love in return." Before Emma could ask what he meant, the ghost glided away with a courtly bow leaving her to ponder his words as the breakfast crowd began to disperse. The day continued in the same vein as it had begun. Emma attended her classes, watching classmates receive deliveries of sweets and flowers throughout the morning, and tried to concentrate on lessons while fighting off waves of loneliness that seemed particularly acute, in contrast to the romantic atmosphere pervading the castle. By afternoon, she found herself seeking refuge in one of the quieter corridors near the library, settling into a window alcove with a book she had no real interest in reading. The February sky outside was grey and forbidding, matching her mood perfectly, and she allowed herself a few moments of thoroughly self-indulgent melancholy. Well, well, what have we here? A damsel in distress, perhaps? Emma looked up to see the bloody Baron materializing from the stone wall, his silver chains clanking softly as he moved. The Slytherin ghost was considerably more intimidating than nearly headless Nick, with his gaunt face, hollow eyes, and the mysterious bloodstains that gave him his name. Emma had always found him rather frightening, and had never attempted conversation with him before. "Oh, hello," she said uncertainly, not sure of the proper protocol for addressing such an imposing figure. "You look thoroughly miserable," the Baron observed, with what might have been amusement in his hollow voice. "Let me guess. Valentine's Day is not living up to your expectations." Emma bristled slightly at his tone. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you." The Baron's laugh was like wind through empty chambers. "My dear child, I have been observing the romantic tribulations of Hogwarts students for centuries. I can recognize the symptoms of February 14th disappointment from 3 corridors away." Despite his intimidating appearance, there was something oddly comforting about his matter-of-fact acknowledgement of her feelings. "You've been watching students deal with Valentine's Day for centuries, indeed. And I've learned a few things about love and loneliness in all that time." The Baron settled into a floating position near her alcove, his chains arranging themselves with practiced ease. "Would you like to hear some ghostly wisdom on the subject?" Emma found herself nodding despite her earlier wariness. There was something about the ghost's direct manner that cut through her self-pity and engaged her curiosity. "Love," the Baron began in his sepulchral voice, "is not a finite resource that gets used up when shared. The more you give away, the more you seem to have, and the forms it takes are far more varied than young people usually realize." "That sounds like something Sir Nicholas might say," Emma observed. "Nick and I may have our differences, but on this subject we are in complete agreement," the Baron replied. "We've both learned, through our respective tragedies, that focusing exclusively on what we lack blinds us to what we already possess." Emma looked at him with new curiosity. "Your respective tragedies." The Baron's expression grew even more solemn, if such a thing were possible. "Nick told you about his lost love. I assume he's quite free with that story. Mine is more complicated, more shameful." Something in his tone made Emma lean forward, with genuine interest rather than mere politeness. "You don't have to tell me if it's too painful. Pain shared is pain diminished, child. And perhaps my mistakes can serve as instruction for your generation." The Baron paused, as if gathering courage that seemed strange in such an imposing figure. "I was in love once, desperately and completely, with Helena Ravenclaw, daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw herself." Emma's eyes widened. She knew the story of Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady who haunted Ravenclaw Tower, but she had never connected her to the Bloody Baron. Helena was brilliant, beautiful, and entirely uninterested in my affections, the Baron continued, his voice growing heavier with each word. But instead of accepting her rejection with grace, I became persistent, obsessive. I convinced myself that if I could just make her understand how much I loved her, she would surely return my feelings. The Baron's chains clanked mournfully as he shifted position. When she fled Hogwarts, taking her mother's diadem, I pursued her. I found her in a forest in Albania, and when she still refused my advances, He paused, unable to continue. "You don't have to," Emma began gently. "I killed her," the Baron finished quietly. "In my rage and hurt pride, I ended the life of the woman I claimed to love. Then, realizing the horror of what I had done, I turned the blade on myself." Emma felt tears pricking at her eyes, both for the tragedy of the story and for the obvious pain it still caused the Baron to relate it. "I'm so sorry. The point, Miss Rosewood, is that I spent so much energy focusing on what I wanted, Helena's love, that I completely ignored what she wanted, what she needed, what would actually make her happy. True love, I learned far too late, is not about possessing or being possessed. It's about caring more for another's well-being than for your own desires." The corridor fell silent, except for the distant sound of students' voices echoing from other parts of the castle. Emma sat with the Baron's words, understanding dawning slowly in her mind. "You're saying that feeling sorry for myself because no one sent me a Valentine is missing the point. I'm saying that if you're feeling unloved, perhaps the solution is not to wait for love to be given to you, but to look for opportunities to give it to others," the Baron replied. "Love is not a transaction, child. It's a choice." As if summoned by their conversation about love and kindness, the Grey Lady materialized at the far end of the corridor, her silver form gliding toward them with ethereal grace. Emma had seen Helena Ravenclaw before, but had never spoken with her, knowing her reputation for being reserved and melancholy. "Good afternoon, Helena," the Baron said softly, his entire demeanor changing in her presence. The intimidating figure Emma had been conversing with was replaced by someone almost humble, still carrying the weight of ancient guilt and regret. "Baron," Helena replied coolly, though not unkindly. "Miss Rosewood, I hope you are both well on this day of celebrated affections." Emma looked between the two ghosts, sensing the complex history that still existed between them, even after centuries of shared existence in the castle. "Lady Helena, may I ask you something?" The Grey Lady inclined her head graciously. "Do you? That is, have you forgiven the Baron for what happened between you?" Both ghosts were silent for a long moment, and Emma wondered if she had overstepped some ghostly boundary of propriety. "Forgiveness," Helena said finally, "is not something that happens all at once, like a spell cast with a wand. It is a choice made repeatedly, day after day, year after year, and it benefits the forgiver as much as the forgiven." The Baron's chains rattled softly. "I do not deserve forgiveness for what I did. I know that. Deserving has nothing to do with it," Helena replied gently. "I choose forgiveness, not because you have earned it, but because carrying hatred and anger for centuries is a burden I no longer wish to bear. We are both bound to this castle, both serving penance in our own ways. There is no purpose in continuing to torment ourselves with what cannot be changed. Emma felt deeply moved by the grace in Helena's words and the obvious relief they brought to the Baron. That's beautiful. It is practical, Helena corrected with a slight smile. Hatred is exhausting. Forgiveness is restful. And in a place like Hogwarts, where we are surrounded by young people learning and growing and making their own mistakes, it seems wise to model the kind of compassion we hope they will show to each other and to themselves. The three of them, 2 ghosts and 1 living girl, sat in comfortable contemplation. For several minutes, Emma found herself thinking about her own small disappointments and frustrations. How insignificant they seemed compared to the profound tragedy and eventual healing represented by the Baron and Helena's story. "I've been feeling sorry for myself all day," she admitted finally, feeling unloved because I didn't receive any valentines, any tokens of affection. But I haven't sent any either, have I? I've been waiting for love to come to me, instead of thinking about how I might share it with others. A common mistake, the Baron assured her, and one easily corrected. Helena nodded agreement. Perhaps this evening would be a good time to consider the people in your life who might benefit from knowing they are appreciated, valued, remembered. Emma's mind immediately went to several possibilities. Pip, the house elf, who worked so hard to care for others. The portraits who had comforted her during her lonely night. Her fellow students who had shared their knowledge and friendship in the mysterious study room. Even the professors who dedicated their lives to teaching and protecting students. "I could make valentines," she said thoughtfully. "Not romantic ones, but appreciation cards, thank you notes, little tokens to let people know they matter." "An excellent idea," Helena approved. Love expressed in gratitude is some of the most powerful magic there is. And, the Baron added, with what might have been a smile if his gaunt features had allowed for it, "you might find that giving love brings you more joy than receiving it ever could." Emma stood up with sudden determination, her book forgotten. "I know exactly what I want to do. Thank you, both of you, for helping me understand." As she hurried away toward Gryffindor Tower, Emma heard Helena's voice drifting after her. "Remember, dear child, love multiplies when shared. There is always enough to go around." Emma spent the rest of the afternoon and evening in a frenzy of creative activity. She gathered parchment, colored inks, and whatever craft supplies she could find or borrow from her dormmates. Working at a table in the common room while other students chatted or studied around her, she created a series of simple but heartfelt thank you cards. For Pip, she drew a little garden scene with herbs and flowers, writing inside, "Thank you for showing me that the most important magic is caring for others." For the fat lady, she created a card with musical notes dancing across the page. "Thank you for welcoming me home every night and for watching over all of us with such kindness." For Professor Sinistra, she designed a card decorated with constellations. "Thank you for helping me understand my place in the vast, beautiful universe." She made cards for her study group friends, thanking each of them for their unique contributions to her learning and confidence. She created a special card for nearly headless Nick, expressing gratitude for his wisdom and friendship. She even made one for Professor McGonagall, acknowledging the firm but caring guidance that had helped her adjust to magical education. As the evening progressed, other students began to notice her project and ask about it. Soon, Emma found herself at the center of an impromptu card-making session, with several of her housemates creating their own thank you notes and appreciation cards for people who had made their Hogwarts experience special. "This is much better than moping about Valentines we didn't receive," declared Parvati Patil, carefully colouring a card for Madame Pomfrey, who attended to her recent case of wizard flu. "I never thought about thanking the portraits before," added Lavender Brown, working on a card for Sir Cadogan, despite his tendency to challenge people to duels at inappropriate moments. "But they are always there, watching out for us." The impromptu gratitude project continued well into the evening, with students discovering that expressing appreciation was far more satisfying than dwelling on what they lacked. The common room filled with laughter, creative energy, and the warm feeling that came from focusing on giving rather than receiving. As Emma prepared for bed, she reflected on how dramatically her day had changed. She had started the morning feeling lonely and left out, focusing on her absence from others' romantic celebrations. But through her conversations with the ghosts, she had discovered a deeper truth about love and belonging. Love wasn't something you waited to receive, it was something you actively chose to give. And the more you gave, the more connected you felt to the community around you. The Bloody Baron and the Grey Lady, despite their tragic history, had found a way to transform pain into wisdom and share that wisdom with a lonely student who needed to hear it. Emma fell asleep that night, not thinking about the Valentines she hadn't received, but about the gratitude she would share tomorrow. She had learned that feeling loved wasn't about being chosen by someone else. It was about choosing to love, to appreciate, to connect with the web of relationships that made Hogwarts feel like home. The ghost had taught her that love, like magic, was most powerful when it was freely given without expectation of return. And in that giving, she had found the very sense of belonging and connection she had been longing for all along. In her dreams, Emma heard the faint sound of chains settling into peaceful rest, and the gentle whisper of a woman's voice singing lullabies to the sleeping castle. Even the ghosts, she realized, were part of the great network of care that made Hogwarts not just a school, but a home where all kinds of love could flourish and grow. April arrived at Hogwarts like a gentle awakening, transforming the Scottish Highlands from the stark beauty of winter into the soft promise of spring. Emma noticed the change first in Professor Sprout's greenhouse, where she had been volunteering since February as part of her growing friendship with Pip the house elf. The plants seemed to pulse with new energy, unfurling tender shoots and producing the first delicate blooms that would eventually become the healing herbs so essential to Madame Pomfrey's work. Spring is the most magical time at Hogwarts, Pip had told her just that morning as they carefully transplanted seedlings that would grow into wiggentree bark, essential for protective potions. Everything that has been sleeping through winter begins to remember what it was meant to become. Emma found profound truth in the little elf's observation. As she walked through the corridors on her way to Defense Against the Dark Arts, she realized that she too was remembering what she was meant to become. The anxious, homesick girl who had arrived at Hogwarts in September felt like a distant memory, replaced by someone who moved through the castle with confidence and purpose. The change was evident in dozens of small ways. She no longer hesitated before speaking in class, having learned that her questions were often shared by other students. She navigated the moving staircases, with the unconscious grace of someone truly at home in their environment. Most importantly, she had developed the kind of relationships that made Hogwarts feel not like a school she attended, but like a community she helped create. Emma called Hannah Abbott as she entered the defense classroom. "I saved you a seat. Did you finish the essay on protective charms?" Emma settled beside her Hufflepuff friend with a smile of gratitude. Their study group, born in the mysterious room that had appeared when they needed it most, had evolved into genuine friendship that transcended house boundaries. Barely. I spent most of last night helping Neville with his potions revision. And then Professor Sinistra asked me to assist with the Easter constellation observations. "Look at you," teased Anthony Goldstein from the seat behind her, "becoming indispensable to half the staff. Remember when you were convinced you didn't belong here?" Emma laughed, though she felt a flutter of amazement at how dramatically her perspective had shifted. "It seems impossible now. I can barely remember feeling that way." Professor Quirrell entered the classroom with his usual nervous energy, and Emma settled into the familiar rhythm of academic life. But today felt different somehow, charged with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the lesson on protective ward theory. It was April 15th, she realized, exactly 1 month before the traditional Easter blessing of the boundaries that Professor Sinistra had mentioned during their winter stargazing session. The blessing had become something Emma looked forward to with growing excitement. She had participated in the winter solstice starlight vigil back in December, staying awake all night with a small group of dedicated students to observe the cauldron of Ceridwen's perfect alignment and help renew the castle's protective spells. The experience had been transcendent, a night of magic that went far beyond wand-waving and incantations, connecting her to the deep rhythms of the magical world and the ancient traditions that made Hogwarts more than just a school. Professor Sinistra had explained that the Easter blessing was different from the winter ceremony, less about observation and more about participation, where students, staff, and magical creatures came together to strengthen the bonds of community that were Hogwarts' greatest protection. "Miss Rosewood," Professor Quirrell's voice broke through her reverie. "Perhaps you could demonstrate the proper wand movement for the shield charm." Emma stood smoothly, no longer flustered by being called upon unexpectedly. "Of course, Professor." She drew her wand with the confidence that came from months of practice and genuine understanding. Protego. The silvery shield that materialized before her was strong and steady, reflecting light in gentle, opalescent waves. Emma felt a moment of quiet pride not in showing off, but in demonstrating growth and competence that had been earned through patient effort and the support of her community. "Excellent work," Professor Quirrell praised, his stutter less pronounced when discussing defensive magic. "Notice how Miss Rosewood's shield maintains its integrity without wavering. This is the result of clear intention and emotional stability." As Emma resumed her seat, she caught sight of Draco Malfoy nodding at her with what appeared to be genuine respect. Their relationship had evolved considerably since those early days when house prejudices had kept them at odds. The mysterious study room had broken down many such barriers, creating friendships based on shared academic goals rather than arbitrary divisions. The rest of the morning passed in the pleasant blur of familiar routines. Transfiguration with Professor McGonagall, where Emma successfully transformed her mouse into a crystal goblet on the first attempt. Charms with Professor Flitwick, where she helped Neville master the levitation charm that had given him such trouble early in the year, and herbology with Professor Sprout, where her work with Pip had given her insights that impressed even Hermione. It was during lunch that the announcement came. Professor Dumbledore rose from his seat at the staff table, his presence immediately commanding the attention of the entire Great Hall. The headmaster's eyes held their characteristic twinkle, but also a gravity that suggested important news. "My dear students," he began, his voice carrying easily through the vast space, "as many of you know, Hogwarts has maintained certain protective traditions for over 1,000 years. These rituals are not mere ceremony, but vital magical workings that help preserve the sanctuary we all cherish." Emma leaned forward with interest, sensing that this announcement related to the Easter blessing she had been anticipating. "This year," Professor Dumbledore continued, "we face unusual circumstances. The magical community beyond our walls has been experiencing disturbances. Dark creatures have been spotted in greater numbers than usual, and there have been incidents that suggest our protective boundaries may be under subtle pressure." A murmur of concern rippled through the hall. Emma felt a chill of anxiety, thinking of the wider world beyond Hogwarts' safety. "Therefore," the headmaster said, raising his hand for silence, "this year's Easter blessing of the boundaries will be particularly important. All students are invited to participate, regardless of year or house. This is not a requirement, but rather an invitation to join in one of our most ancient and meaningful traditions." Emma's pulse quickened with excitement mixed with nervousness. She had expected to participate as one of a small group of astronomy enthusiasts. The idea of the entire school coming together for such a significant magical working was both thrilling and slightly overwhelming. The ceremony will take place on Easter Sunday, beginning at sunset and continuing through the night until dawn, Professor Dumbledore explained. "Professor Sinistra will coordinate the proceedings with assistance from all department heads. Students who wish to participate should inform their heads of house by Friday." As the announcement concluded and conversation resumed throughout the hall, Emma found herself surrounded by friends discussing the upcoming ceremony. "I've never heard of anything like this," Hermione admitted, though her eyes were bright with curiosity. "The magical theory behind protective boundaries must be incredibly complex. My older brother participated in a blessing ceremony when he was at school," Ron added, uncharacteristically serious. "He said it was the most magical thing he'd ever experienced. Made him understand why wizards have been willing to die to protect places like Hogwarts." Emma spent the rest of the week in a state of heightened anticipation. She threw herself into research, reading everything she could find about protective magic, boundary spells, and the history of Hogwarts defenses. The library became her second home as she delved into ancient texts that discussed the deep magic that predated even the founders. It was during one of these research sessions that she encountered the Grey Lady in the restricted section, gliding between the shelves with her characteristic grace. "Lady Helena," Emma said softly, not wanting to disturb other students, but hoping for a moment of conversation. Miss Rosewood the Ghost replied warmly, "I see you are preparing for the blessing. How wonderfully dedicated of you. I want to understand what I'm participating in, Emma explained. This feels like something important, something I should approach with proper respect. Helena's expression grew thoughtful. When I was alive, I participated in several blessing ceremonies. They were transformative experiences. The magic involved goes far deeper than mere spell casting. What do you mean? The Grey Lady settled into a position that suggested a lengthy explanation. The protective boundaries around Hogwarts are not maintained by magic alone. They are sustained by the collective will and love of everyone who calls this place home. Students, staff, ghosts, house elves, even the magical creatures of the grounds, we all contribute to the magical field that keeps this sanctuary safe. Emma felt a thrill of understanding. So it's not just about casting spells, it's about dark community magic. Precisely, Helena smiled. The most powerful protection comes not from individual strength, but from the bonds of love and loyalty that connect all members of the Hogwarts family. The blessing ceremony renews and strengthens those bonds. As Easter Sunday approached, Emma noticed changes throughout the castle. House elves worked with unusual visibility, preparing the Great Hall and grounds for the ceremony. The portraits seemed more animated than usual, chattering excitedly among themselves about the upcoming event. Even the ghosts appeared to be preparing, with nearly headless Nick practicing what looked like formal courtly bows, and the bloody Baron polishing his chains to an unprecedented shine. Professor Sinistra held special preparation sessions for students who wanted to understand their role in the ceremony. Emma attended every one, learning about the astronomical significance of the Easter timing, the geometric patterns that would be traced on the grounds, and the way individual magical contributions would weave together into a protective tapestry of extraordinary complexity. The most important thing to remember, Professor Sinistra emphasized during the final preparation session, is that your individual magical strength is less important than your connection to this community. The ceremony works because we all participate together, each contributing what we can to the greater good. Easter Sunday dawned clear and warm, with a kind of perfect spring weather that seemed designed for magical ceremonies. Emma spent the day in a state of excited nervousness, unable to concentrate on anything except the approaching evening. She helped Pip with some last-minute herb preparations for the ceremonial potions, assisted Professor Flitwick with charm work on the Great Hall decorations, and even found herself helping Professor McGonagall move furniture to create the proper spaces for the evening's activities. As sunset approached, the entire Hogwarts community gathered on the grounds. Emma was amazed to see the sheer scope of participation. Students from all four houses mingling freely, professors setting aside their usual formal demeanor, house elves working alongside wizards, and even centaurs emerging from the forbidden forest to take their place in the great circle that was forming around the castle. Professor Dumbledore stood at the center of the gathering, his robes seeming to capture and reflect the golden light of the setting sun. "My friends," he said, his voice somehow carrying clearly to every person present, despite the vast space. "We gathered tonight, not as separate houses or individual magic workers, but as one community united in our love for this sanctuary that has been home to so many." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes as the headmaster continued. "The magic we will work tonight is the magic of connection, of choosing to stand together against whatever darkness may threaten the light we have built here. Each of you is essential to this working, not because of your individual power, but because of your place in the tapestry of relationships that makes Hogwarts more than the sum of its parts. As the ceremony began, Emma found herself positioned between Hannah Abbott and Anthony Goldstein, with Pip, the house elf, on one side and nearly headless Nick on the other. The circle stretched around the entire castle, encompassing students, staff, ghosts, house elves, centaurs, and even a few thestrals who had emerged to participate in the ancient ritual. The working began with a simple joining of hands, or in the case of ghosts and other incorporeal beings, a connection of magical intent that served the same purpose. Emma felt the connection immediately, a warm current of magical energy that flowed from person to person around the entire circle. But more than magical power, she sensed the emotional bonds that truly held the community together. Love, loyalty, friendship, and a shared commitment to protecting their home. As the ceremony progressed through the night, Emma experienced magic unlike anything she had encountered in her classes. This was not magic wielded by individuals, but magic that emerged from collective will and shared purpose. She felt her own magical core expand and strengthen, not through personal effort, but through connection to the larger magical field created by hundreds of minds and hearts working in harmony. The protective boundaries around Hogwarts became visible during the ceremony, shimmering fields of golden light that rose from the ground and arched overhead like a vast dome of safety. Emma could see how the magic flowed and eddied, strengthening in areas where the community bonds were strongest, and she understood viscerally why individual magical power mattered less than collective commitment. At one point during the long night, as the ceremony reached a crescendo of magical energy, Emma found herself thinking about her journey from September to this moment. The homesick, uncertain girl who had arrived at Hogwarts had been gradually transformed, not through grand adventures or dramatic revelations, but through countless small moments of connection and care. She thought of the Sorting Hat's evening songs and the wisdom of the portraits who watched over students with painted eyes full of love. She remembered Pip's patient teachings about caring for others as the deepest form of magic, and Professor Sinistra's lessons about finding her place in the vast cosmos. The mysterious study room had taught her about the power of cooperation and mutual support, while the ghosts had shown her that love was most powerful when freely given without expectation of return. All of these experiences had led to this moment, standing in a circle with her entire community, participating in magic that protected not just the building, but a way of life, contributing her own small but essential part to something infinitely larger and more beautiful than anything she could have achieved alone. As dawn approached and the ceremony reached its conclusion, Emma felt the protective boundaries settle into their renewed strength, invisible again, but somehow more present than before. The magical dome of safety that surrounded Hogwarts now carried the conscious intention and love of everyone who had participated in its renewal. Professor Dumbledore spoke a final blessing over the assembled community as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky pink and gold. May this sanctuary continue to provide safe haven for all who seek knowledge, growth, and connection. May we remember that our greatest strength lies not in our individual abilities, but in our willingness to stand together in defense of what we cherish. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Emma found herself surrounded by friends from all 4 houses, all exhausted but exhilarated by the night's magical working. They walked together toward the castle as the sun rose fully, painting the ancient stones in warm light that seemed to acknowledge the renewed protection that surrounded their home. "I can't believe the year is almost over," Hannah said as they climbed the steps to the great hall, where house elves were already preparing breakfast for the tired but triumphant participants. Emma paused on the threshold, looking back at the grounds where they had just completed one of the most meaningful experiences of her life. "I know what you mean, but also, I'm not afraid of it ending anymore." "What do you mean?" asked Anthony, pausing beside her. "When I arrived here in September, I was so focused on trying to fit in, to find my place, to belong," Emma explained. "But now I understand that belonging isn't something you find. It's something you create day by day, through the connections you make and the care you give to others." She gestured toward the castle and grounds that were now fully bathed in morning sunlight. "Hogwarts will always be home to me now, not because it's where I learned magic, but because it's where I learned how to be part of something larger than myself, where I learned that the most powerful magic is the magic of community and connection." Later that morning, as Emma sat in the common room, writing in her diary, she reflected on the profound transformation that had taken place over the course of the school year. The girl who had arrived at Hogwarts in September, homesick and uncertain, had discovered not just her magical abilities, but her capacity for friendship, service, and belonging. "Dear Diary," she wrote, "I used to think that home was where you came from, but I have learned that home is where you choose to invest your heart. Hogwarts has become home, not because I was sorted into Gryffindor or because I learned to cast spells, but because I chose to care about this place and the people in it. I've learned that belonging isn't about being chosen by others. It's about choosing to contribute to something larger than yourself. Every time I helped Pip in the garden, every night I spent studying with friends from different houses, every conversation with the portraits and ghosts who watch over us, I was choosing to be part of the Hogwarts community. The magic I learned this year wasn't just in the spells and potions and theoretical knowledge, though those were important too. The real magic was in discovering that when people come together with love and shared purpose, they can create something beautiful and powerful and protective. I'll carry this with me wherever I go. The understanding that home is something you create through connection, that belonging is something you choose through service, and that the most powerful magic is the magic that binds communities together in love and mutual care. Emma set down her quill and looked around the common room, where she had spent so many hours over the past months. Tomorrow, students would begin preparing for final exams. In a few weeks, the school year would end and she would return to her Muggle parents for the summer. But she no longer felt anxiety about leaving or uncertainty about returning. She belonged to Hogwarts now, not as a visitor or temporary resident, but as someone who had helped weave herself into the magical tapestry that protected and sustained this remarkable place. And Hogwarts belonged to her, not as possession, but as the home of her heart, the place where she had learned, who she was meant to become. The spring sunlight streamed through the common room windows, warming the space where Emma sat, surrounded by the quiet contentment that came from truly knowing where she belonged. She had found her place in the world, not through grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but through the simple magic of choosing to love and be loved in return. Outside, the grounds of Hogwarts basked in the protective magic they had renewed together, and Emma smiled with the deep satisfaction of someone who had found her way home at last. Thus concludes our gentle journey through the quieter magics of Hogwarts, where the greatest transformations happen not through grand adventures, but through the accumulated wisdom of countless small moments of connection and care. Emma Rosewood's story reminds us that belonging is not a destination to be reached, but a choice to be made daily, through kindness offered, wisdom received, and love shared freely without expectation of return. In the space between autumn's uncertainty and spring's renewal, she discovered what countless students before her have learned, that Hogwarts' greatest magic lies not in its spells or potions, but in its infinite capacity to help lost souls find their way home. The Sorting Hat still hums its evening songs to empty halls, carrying the stories of every student who has ever sought their place in the magical world. The portraits continue their midnight vigils, watching over sleeping students with painted eyes full of ancient love. House elves tend their secret gardens, growing healing herbs and the deeper magic of care itself. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, connecting each generation of learners to the vast cosmic story of wonder and belonging. And somewhere in the castle's protective embrace, other uncertain first years are beginning their own journeys of discovery, learning, as Emma did, that home is not where you come from, but where you choose to plant the seeds of love and watch them grow into the magic that binds communities together across time. The evening fire burns low in the common room now, but its warmth lingers, a gentle reminder that in a place like Hogwarts, no one who truly seeks belonging ever remains alone for long. The castle itself ensures it, through whispered portrait wisdom, house elf kindness, ghostly guidance, and the simple magic of friends who become family. May your own evenings be as enchanted, and may you always remember that the most powerful magic is the magic of coming home to yourself and others.